AEW has had a long-standing issue with dumb comedy, and by definition, dumb comedy is when you do stupid or silly behavior and you think that it is actually comedic. And then also in dumb comedy and in comedy, there's something called a tonal shift where you're taking a moment that is supposed to be serious and then you actually make it non-serious. And definitely in the reign of MJF, that's kind of really hurt his whole title reign, and then also the storyline between him and Adam Cole. Definitely comedy is needed in professional wrestling because it was all just seriousness. What happens is that it gets boring and bland. And actually, when you look at the Attitude Era and also the Hulk Hogan era, those things became very successful because wrestling was not always just sport based. It was always about like the glitz and glamour and pizzazz, really. So it's definitely needed. But also, if you overdo it, you end up creating a Vince Russo type of thing, or you end up turning professional wrestling cartoonish. So I do want to examine very deeply AEW's problem with dumb comedy. Dumb comedy hurts long-term storylines. So when you look at the feud between Adam Cole and MJF, a lot of people will say that MJF had a really great title reign and it started to get crappy towards his storyline with Adam Cole about their friendship. And one of the reasons why it became really bad was because that was when MJF was starting to do things like have dance-offs in the middle of the ring. They had a bunch of promos that were kind of very reminiscent of The Hangover and Superbad and other movies. I've not seen those films. And I think a lot of people were kind of saying that it just got to a point where it was always like interjected and it didn't feel, like it was needed. What would have happened if you had Adam Cole actually be very serious throughout? What would have happened if instead of Roderick Strong saying, "Oh, Adam," a bunch of times, or instead of one of the members of the Undisputed Kingdom actually hanging out with a pet giraffe all the time? What would happen if they participated in the Continental Classic? What would have happened if the Bullet Club Gold did a beatdown of MJF and then the Undisputed Kingdom actually came in and they beat down Bullet Club Gold and they said, we're going to have a blood and guts match. You are not going to hurt MJF. A friend of Adam is a friend of ours. When you look at the Devil reveal, I think that would have been more powerful if all those wrestlers in the Undisputed Kingdom and Adam Cole were being really, really serious. It would have felt more of like a betrayal of brothers, And I do agree with what Jim Cornette said, that honestly, if you have these wrestlers losing and being dorky and silly, now you're trying to take them seriously, it really doesn't get over with the audience. So definitely the first argument of dumb comedy hurting long-term storytelling is definitely very evidential. Another issue with long-term storytelling is that it's very egotistical. Definitely when you've seen like something where Chris Jericho did like the 25 years of Chris Jericho and he had like all the credits be about him, that does feel very pretentious. And then also he did something where he spooked the Brady Bunch and showed like, him in squares with his dogs and I think a few other people in his life. And then also there's a thing where he had his dogs chase a drone or things like that. Like a lot of people were kind of saying too, it kind of felt like Tony Khan was giving a lot of creative control to Chris Jericho. And a lot of people can read that as, okay, well, it's like Chris Jericho running amok. And some people are saying they don't respect Chris Jericho right now because he seems like to be a glory hog, or he seems like always have like attention put on him. But also when you have a wrestler trying to do their comedy all the time, it can be somebody who's like, I'm just going to I think I like my jokes. I think my jokes are funny. And then it actually reads as egotistical. Another example is, as Jim Cornette puts it, football field fuckery with, the Young Bucks and other people doing like the Stadium Stampede matches. Like how, the first one that they did, you saw like Chris Jericho put like a cone on his head and he's trying to act like he's the Wicked Witch of the West. And then you kind of see like them doing Northern Lights suplexes on Sammy Guevara through an entire ring. And then they did super kicks on referees. Like, again, it may be stuff that may be funny to them, really, but as, Cornette and other people argue that it really hurts the wrestling show, because obviously if somebody's being hit by a Northern Light suplexes over 20 times and they're not getting pinned, that hurts the wrestling business, and then also the other thing is that, it's like over the top comedy. So is it really like we're laughing at the performance, or are we laughing at the comedy, or we're really like, okay, well, we're laughing because it's so absurd? And then when it is absurd, does it really help AEW stand out, or is it kind of like, what, we're more concerned about comedy than actual real storytelling? So definitely, I think that sometimes when people make comedy, they're almost in love with their art a lot. And when you are in love with your art a lot, sometimes you forget that maybe not everybody's really interested in your own joke. And sometimes you may feel so convicted in your own comedy that you're going to like try to get creative control. So it doesn't come off as funny to everybody. It comes off as somebody with a big ego. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Conway Twitty. This is also another issue with AEW, is that, comedy and dumb comedy can also be very, very cliche. And definitely when you look at MJF doing the dance-offs, that's a great example of that. Or how a lot of people talk about, like you look at World's End and he does another promo where there is comedy within that promo. So, like you're trying to have this really serious match. You're trying to like maybe reveal who the devil is. And then in the promo, a woman's talking about like how she had hardcore crazy sex with MJF in the back of a car. And then also because you've seen many times he's done promos with silliness, or there's many times he has matches where he is, either gyrating and acting like a male stripper, or sometimes the match stops in the middle and they're doing a dance off and stuff like that. If it happens a bunch of times, it doesn't become funny. The same way, a lot of people look at Family Guy and they're kind of like, okay, the Conway Twitty joke. Maybe the first time it's funny because it's out of place and it's ridiculous, but if you do it like 10 or more times, it's a little bit more, a little ridiculous and whatever. It's definitely very, very cliche when you see MJF do, the same type of dance moves, the same type of promos with comedy in it, and the same type of, stopping a match to do some, gigolo dance moves, or just to like play like, some dance music and start dancing. Or even when he does media scrums and he talks about wanting to join WWE, or he always interjects comedy, and it always kind of seems with him that he's very repetitive. So almost like, as they say, same old shit, so that is an argument to be made that, dumb comedy can become cliche, or it could be a, kind of overused, or maybe it's like, instead of new ideas, we're going to repeat the same idea over and over. The other thing about dumb comedy is it doesn't make great world champions. Like, honestly, I do appreciate MJF having a mix of being serious and intense and also having some dumb comedy, because definitely it's good to be versatile. But if you're always overdoing dumb comedy, you don't make a really good champion, and that's been a criticism towards MJF. I think a better user of comedy is John Cena. Like in some of his promos, yes, he does break balls, he does act like a smartass, but when he has matches, he is definitely more intense and more competitive. And sometimes he may interject some comedy to taunt his opponents, but he always kind of knows when to be a little funny and to just have the right balance. But with MJF, it seems like he overly does comedy. Or I think another, great example is Max Caster. Like, honestly, in the rap battles, and like the diss raps and the music videos, he does use a lot of comedy and has a lot of that smart ass type of comedy. But it seems like when he has matches in the ring, he's more about accomplishing a victory and also telling a story of an underdog. And that's also very, very important, because honestly, if you are like a champion of a company, you cannot kind of always interject comedy, because it says, okay, well, the main star of the company is a comedian. And honestly, one of the reasons why I think Samoa Joe is going to have a great title reign is honestly, he is the opposite of MJF. He's not there to be Mr. Comedy. He's not there, Samoa Joe can dance, he can rap, he can do other things like that, but he doesn't want to be that type of person. He wants to kind of be that, this AEW is very, very competitive, and I think that that's going to be a good contrast. But when you have a champion that's nothing but comedy and jokes, really, or he's always going to interject it even when it's not appropriate, it does become annoying. And then people are going to say, okay, then what type of show is this? The final boss, the person with the world champion, is actually, really, really, really comedic. So you can't take that person seriously. Another great example is you look at Otis in WWE. Why do you think they did something where he won the Money in the Bank and then they took it off him and gave it to The Miz and had The Miz versus Bobby Lashley? Because they didn't want Bobby Lashley to beat Otis for the WWE Championship. Because if Otis became the WWE Champion, he's kind of gyrating, being like that fat bastard looking gigolo dancer beating Bobby Lashley. How's that going to look? How's that going to make Bobby Lashley look like a serious champion? Or another great example, Santino Marella. A lot of people were mad that Alberto Del Rio eliminated him at the Royal Rumble, but then again, if you're gonna have WrestleMania, you would rather have a serious wrestler like Alberto Del Rio. It would also be a huge risk, because then people will be like, okay, well, wrestling is silly. You have a silly guy winning a championship at WrestleMania. Dumb comedy does not make good world champions. The last argument that I want to make is, wasn't AEW supposed to be sports-based wrestling? Like, ultimately, they were supposed to be a wrestling company that took wins and losses seriously. That's why they have a ranking system. They also wanted to get away from sports entertainment, where it was kind of like short matches and more about promos and comedy and silliness, and create more of a competitive sports-based wrestling. And also be inspired by Japanese wrestling, where it was kind of like strong style, which is long matches, definitely high endurance and high octane. Their original purpose was not to be like Vince McMahon and interject dumb comedy. So it's kind of like a little hypocritical that AEW has kind of gone that direction. Or even, you look at MJF, and I think his original purpose was to be the champion and hold it for a very long time and really just be that person that's like, I've worked very hard to get to the top, and that's what AEW is about misfits working hard to get to the top, really, but not somebody getting to the top and becoming, a frat boy comedian. And that's kind of what I see with MJF, or even like with Tony Khan and his philosophy around the company. Isn't AEW supposed to be sports based? It is supposed to be, the right charismatic wrestler and the right, physically competitive wrestler holding the title. That, I think with the ring with MJF, they kind of proven that they want to be more about, like silliness and, dumb comedy, really. So it is kind of hypocritical. Or you look at somebody like Orange Cassidy doing the shin kicks, or you kind of look at, again, the Stadium Stampede matches where they're supposed to interject comedy, or even like street fights where there are some comedic spots, really. So it's definitely a little hypocritical of AEW to kind of really always back the dumb comedy. So I'll conclude it with this, that definitely dumb comedy, it does have a place in professional wrestling and other forms of entertainment. Like, definitely when you even look at Quentin Tarantino films, there is comedy in almost every film that he does, but there's also seriousness and intensity. He's a master of flowing through different emotions. And honestly, all the best stories in the world have a little bit of comedy and tragedy in it. It's not just, one tone throughout, really. And that also makes good professional wrestling. You have a mix of seriousness and you have a mix of non-seriousness. But definitely, if you're only one way, really, or if you kind of interrupt a very serious moment with farts in church, which is another way of saying dumb comedy, things that are funny that are not really necessary or definitely unnecessary, it doesn't make for great programming. And I do kind of really hope that as AEW goes forward, that they really understand they do have an issue with dumb comedy being overly used in their company. It's down to people with really big egos having a lot of pull and doing things that are just funny to them. I think it also kind of comes down to people not having new ideas, so they're going to do the same old style of silly humor. I do think that, you know, they'll do well with more serious stuff and just reserving comedy to just a very small group of wrestlers. You know, maybe Max Caster could be the smartass, maybe Chris Jericho could be a bit of a comedian, maybe MJF can have it, but definitely there should be like a group of people that are more serious. And definitely I think when they have future world champions, they definitely should have a more serious personality. You know, sometimes they can be comedic, but if they overly do it, then that's not a good look for the company. AEW does have an issue with dumb comedy.